Reverend Meg Soens. I'm the minister here at First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church in Medfield. This morning I've got with me Regie Gibson, who is a really great poet and a high-energy artist. I'm very excited to have a chance to talk with you, Regie, because not only because of who you are, but because of what's happening. Reggie's going to be performing at our church on October 10th. It's a Saturday, and the performance will be, it's at 7, right?
It is at 7,
7
yes.
p.m. So I'm really excited that we were able to get you to come because
Thank you.
I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah. I'm getting that feeling.
Are you getting that feeling?
Getting that feeling, yeah.
Well, Regie, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is as a poet and as an artist, so that the people who haven't had a chance to see you yet will have a sense for that?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm from Chicago,
Okay.
by way of Mississippi. I came out here to Massachusetts about 16 years ago.
Okay.
And started working with some of the schools in Massachusetts and some of the churches in Massachusetts. But what I do as a poet is I bring together, I like to call myself a literary musician. Bring together both literature and music, but I try to explore also what's musical inside of the literature that I present. So I like to bring together also older things with newer ways of presenting it. For instance, I might do the Iliad or parts thereof as hip-hop.
Okay, so for not all of us know what the Iliad is, and I'm sort of remembering it vaguely, but remind me what the Iliad is.
Very ancient poem, one of probably the oldest complete extant epic poem we have in Western culture.
Okay.
It is about war, essentially, but also about how we survive it, how people can be changed as a result of it, and what can also lead to it. And I might mix that with hip hop. There are other things I mix with blues and jazz, and I like to use a lot of music in order to present that, because that's the way the bards used to roll. That's they sang the pieces and told the stories, and
So I remember talking with you. I remember seeing you, actually. I have seen you perform, and this is why I'm excited that you're going to be here, because you were performing, I think, in Lexington, and you said it was a piece that was composed of three different people's work flowing into it. Remind me about
well,
that.
This was for the Martin Luther King Day celebration. This was some years ago, and it was at the Cary Hall, and I had musicians also with me. Two people playing, one person on cello, another person on violin, someone else on bass clarinet. There was another gentleman who came in who was also playing bass, guitar. And the presentation was about the words, bringing together the words of three of my heroes, which were Dr. Martin Luther King, Henry David Thoreau, and Mohandas Gandhi.
Oh, yeah.
And understanding how all three of them had influenced each other.
Yep.
That, Gandhi was influenced by civil disobedience, by Thoreau. Also, so was King. But King was also influenced by Gandhi.
Right.
And Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, or truth force, love force,
right.
and sought to bring that into the philosophy he had of that what he was developing as far as how to go about the best way of securing civil rights, while at the same time maintaining ethic and morality and humanity and humility in the face of the inhumane.
Right.
And all three of them were peaceful and had a peaceful resistance, and understood that they could intellectually pull themselves back from an action that with which they disagreed, but also they could make their political actions also be spiritual actions as well. And I'm intrigued with both of those, how we operate on a spiritual level as well as a secular level. How do we take what is in the spirit of what we tend to understand as spirit, and make that something which is a real expression of how we move through the world. And I think art can help us to do that. And when I look at all of those things that were brought together through Gandhi and Thoreau and King, words were a huge part of it. And because all of them, ultimately, we know about what they gave us because of their words.
Right.
And how they affected other people.
Right. So there goes the poet, right?
The
spoken word person.
There it is, yeah.
But with the life and the added vitality of music that transcends and carries us along too.
Yeah, I hope so.
So, what should people expect, you think, at at a performance? Are they going to see what performance now? I'm thinking of on October 10th. What sort of things are you thinking about might be happening on the stage when we arrive?
Well, there is going to be introduction storytelling.
Okay.
There is going to be a little bit of ribbing, I guess. There is the trickster part, which is always a part of stories. Just a little bit of a rib, a little bit of a nudge here and there. There's going to be some laughter, I hope. You never know how something's going to land on people, but we hope that that'll be a part of it. And there'll be poems of love. There'll be poems, and we're really not talking about romantic love in a sense, though of course it may be part of it. But could be parental love. There'll be songs of celebration, and we have a song that will get people up and dancing.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
That's good.
And so if people do feel the need to jump up and say yes and have a great time with that, which we hope that they will.
Yeah.
That's what we wish to do, and bringing together the music and the poetry and the spirit and the human and the sweat, the good, the bad, and the repulsive, and all of that of who we are, to celebrate and acknowledge all of that.
Yeah. Great. Oh, that sounds wonderful. You mentioned, I'm just interested a little bit more in your background. You mentioned you grew up in Chicago.
Yes.
And you went to Mississippi for a while.
Yeah, I was born in Mississippi, and my parents left Mississippi in the 1960s. One of the last migrations of people who were looking to get away from the South for just pick a reason in the 1960s to get away from the South, and so we came. My mother and my father, they moved here, and I have a song about this, which I'll sing absolutely. How they moved here. And they couldn't afford to take me along, so they left me with my grandmother, and then came back to get me, and then had my brother, and basically we stayed in Chicago, and my father became a police officer, and my mother became a very devout Jehovah's Witness. Yes, I could probably use some therapy, from dealing with what that was about. And maybe that's what I do. I work it out in my art.
So you went back to Mississippi for a while after you finished school, or was that where you came from?
Well, it's where I came from, but I went back all the time. Because family was there, and we would have long summers. All summers were spent there. Yeah, okay. And when we would celebrate a Christmas or two, which my mother didn't really, but when my father went to, we would go there. Yeah. So the ties were very strong. Yeah. There in Mississippi, and I guess that's always where my first words come from, and where my poetry comes from. Out of that experience, my great grandfather, who I had the privilege of knowing, along with his mother. I knew my great grandmother. Well, it was because it was the South. It was an agrarian culture, so people tended to get married and have children earlier, the distance between generations was much smaller. So you could know people who were several generations ahead of you, and they could be a part of the life. And I look at now how lucky I was to have that. But my great granddad, Robert, he could not read. He was illiterate. Yeah. And he couldn't even he could barely write his name, and he would tell stories about, it was a mnemonic device for him to be able to remember things. He would make up rhymes, he would make up songs, he would tell stories about things. And we used to joke about him that if he was able to tell you a story that was just no mistakes, beautifully wrought, all that, the more, it was probably not true. It probably didn't happen because it was rehearsed. But if he could bumble through it and stumble through it and try to remember, we would say, yeah, it's probably something that really happened. And I think it sort of passed on to me and sort of the rest of my brother. He also, he's a barber. And so he loves holding court and chatting with people and exchanging stories and all the time about stuff. So I think we get that from our great grandfather. Yeah. That's where the love of it, I think, comes from. Yeah. Oh boy.
So did you get into poetry and writing did you study it, or was it just something that you felt like you really wanted to do after you reached a certain point in your life?
Well, I did study later, but it was something that I was drawn to. Again, I think it was the love of words. Yeah. And but the thing I think that really hit me was my Uncle Larry, and I still have this. He gave me my first dictionary, which when I was for my 7th birthday, and
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, which
You're
is?
gonna learn. You used to like looking through it and just
I
picking
did.
out words.
I did, but I started. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is one of the things I loved about the dictionary.
Yeah.
But I read the thing. I mean, read the dictionary, abacus, aardvark, whatever. But yeah, and I'll bring it. Maybe you'll see it. It's just pretty beat up now. I kept this in plastic, and my uncle was funny because he was not a person for words at all.
He's the one who gave you the dictionary.
But he gave me the dictionary. Yeah, as a matter of fact, he had some substance abuse issues, and I remember when he even gave it to me. I'm not going to say all the words he said when he gave it to me, but what he said was something along the lines of, "You're good with those words. I don't have any use for this. Here, you take it."
Wow.
That was it. And my uncle, I don't know that maybe there was something in him that realized the gift he was giving me of helping me out. Maybe it was just that it was my 7th birthday and he was expected to give me something. So he gave me something he didn't want. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it became an integral part of my life, this love affair with both the spoken and the written word. And then later on I studied it. I got my master's degree in creative writing with concentration in poetry from New England College here in New England, and been on that ever since. Even before that, but ever since. But before I did that, I was traveling. Had the opportunity to go to Europe and do presentations of different versions of myths, and to work with a mask ensemble where I was also telling stories and mythology and dancers and sometimes stuff is on stilts and props and all of that. And it was a wonderful experience for me because where I come from in Chicago, you don't get to travel Europe without joining somebody's army.
Right.
Where I came from.
Right.
I just took my kids we just went to England and Ireland. And I had to tell them that again. I'm like, I don't think you kind of understand this. When I was 9 years old, this was not a possibility.
Right.
In my mind, you didn't get to do that. And so when I was in my mid-20s or early 20s and I got the chance to travel and to go to Europe and to go to these places, I just jumped at it. I took it. Came back broke.
Yeah,
no money at all.
It's
but
expensive.
And you know what? I love spending at the time, Deutschmark, Gulden, whatever, Lira, whatever they had at the time before the EU. But I love spending every dime.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I was thinking that whole travel and talking about the masks, working with people with the mask ensemble. I mean, were they actually big masks?
They were huge. They were
huge.
They were huge. I mean, they were huge and they were hot. And so sometimes we would have them, and we would have the hands would also be that way. If we were doing
gloves on or something?
they were the Mr. Buchwald, who was the gentleman who created Hans. I'm sure he's no longer alive, but he had a theater company, a puppet theater company called the Charnier Theater.
Okay.
And his daughter was working in Chicago at the time, and so I started working with her in the schools. Okay. And then they got a grant to bring all of us over to Germany. That's what was my first excursion of that. But he was this very famous puppeteer and making all this huge stuff. So we would have full body everything, and sometimes there might be a head on that's it's on my shoulders, but it's 5 feet up in the air, and I'd have to project if I'm saying something or figure out how to act in a certain kind of way to project the words, and it was a really fine and tiring and beautiful experience. But when you're in your early 20s,
right.
when one is in one's early 20s, there's a lot of things one can do that you can't do it later on. But it was a great experience.
Right. Well, it sounds like you started really with a lot of energy in some of the great myths, thinking about the great myths, acting them out, reworking them with your own words, or taking, moving out from them, but with that as a basis.
Yes.
So what kind of thing are you focusing on these days? What's sort of pulling at you to express something? What's your newest work?
That's a good question. Well, the latest thing I put together, which we just did, I'm working with another gentleman named Jeff Robinson, and we've begun something called the Art Ensemble of Boston. And our first excursion into this, which is, as we call it, is an omni-artistic presentation, usually focusing on a particular theme. And our first one out the box was 9/11.
Okay.
And we just worked with some the members of a particular dance troupe, Paradise Lost, and musicians who are in my own ensemble. The musicians who will be here on the 10th.
Okay.
and wonderful musicians. And we constructed through poetry and storytelling and song. We wanted to have it be a philosophical excursion and a deep look at who we are as Americans since 9/11. What that we look at that as historic, but it's also mythic.
Yeah.
And what happens when something mythic happens to a people is it winds up affecting how they see themselves from that point forward, and makes them question who they were from that point backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And we want more of that, the looking toward who we are, who we could be, what were we. And we believe, and I believe, and this is why I wrote this stuff, is that art is intrinsic in that looking. We've seen it from a political perspective, and we've even heard it being spoken of from religious perspectives and all of that. But I think it's time for art to also say that. Now that we can look at this through both a microscope, because of the distance of time, and a telescope,
Mm-hmm.
you know, now that we can have that a sort of multifocal examination of it, I think it's time as a nation that we do so, and I think art can help again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are lots of things lots of things in our past that we could re-examine and
Mm-hmm.
think about.
Yes.
Yeah.
And approach it from a different perspective. There's one, you know, maybe we want to look at it strictly from an intellectual perspective to understand certain things and compartmentalize it. And then there's other things we want to synthesize and sort of
Right.
bring it together and say, okay, well, what is the metaphor of this? How am I supposed to take this? What is the higher understanding? I understand the facts,
Right.
but there's a truth that goes and resonates beyond the facts.
Right.
And how do I put both of those together to get a greater understanding of what it meant to go through this and become this?
Right.
You know, and so I think again that's what art tends to do. The group I'm working with, the Regie Gibson Project, it's not because of narcissism, it's just because we just couldn't think of a name. And when people started telling us, hey, we'd like you guys to come, we're like, well, what do we want to call ourselves? I don't know what we want to call ourselves. This is, how about the RGP? We just, for right now, it's a placeholder, the Regie Gibson Project. All right, fine, we'll call it that. And then it kind of stuck. And I go back to the guys, I'm like, do we still want to do this? Yeah, man, we've done a few shows, why not? Why change it? Well, okay, fine. But we do those. We do intersections of music and poetry and storytelling. And the guys, I encourage them to sometimes interpret what they're hearing musically in their own way. And there are other things which are just really just very, very, we've done it enough, we understand how it's supposed to move, and we've structured it out.
Right.
And sometimes we do things, say, hey, I'm going to try something new on you guys, and let's just see what happens in the moment. Let's see what goes on. And it's something that may never, again, be repeated.
Right.
But what I love about working with all of these guys is that they're patient. They can listen, and that's the thing about working with musicians who can actually listen. And someone will say, well, what do you mean? They always listen. Well, no, not necessarily. They might feel something, but when you're working with poetry, you know, I feel that what's necessary is you hear it all, we talk about what you're getting from it, and then we talk about a way to go about interpreting it in the way that you think it should be interpreted. Right. But it's about the understanding and grasping of both the sound and the sense of what is being put out there. And then taking the sound and sense that I might have had in my head and making sense of that sound.
Right, in another medium.
In another medium, exactly, in another medium. So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be some of that going on.
So 9/11 is one of the things you're thinking about. Any other topics or?
Oh yes. Want to examine love in February, of course. We're looking at one which is based on Massachusetts, like Sketches of Massachusetts, based upon an understanding of Sketches of Spain by Miles Davis, which was a wonderful album that came out in the 1950s, which was his take on certain Spanish classics as well. But we're looking to do this with essayists and storytellers, singers, and actors and poets from around Massachusetts to talk about issues of Massachusetts, a lot of what we love about Massachusetts. So that's another one that's also in the works, and the you know, there's always a few other things here and there that I wouldn't want to talk about right now. You know, there's always that.
They're brewing.
Because they're brewing, but they're also because we want to make sure that all of the people who we want to be a part of this are actually going to commit to being a part of this, and then we can talk about you know that. But these other things, we know we have a committee. We know we have people who've committed to it.
That are already involved.
We do. We have that. Right. So, also I work in the schools, which is one of the things I really love. Education is a huge part of what I do.
Do you work in high schools or middle schools? What's your sort of age group? And
K through college
okay,
is what I like to do. Before it was strictly high school,
yeah.
and I guess it's because that's where I saw the most need. But as I started doing more and more of it, people started asking me if I could do something for younger and younger audiences.
Yeah.
And as you know, my wife Katie, she's in early childhood education, and I find that her and I, we speak about these things, not only from a professional perspective of me from the aesthetics part of it, and her being from, the scholastic part of it, and the practical, exactly,
right.
cognition and development, but also because we have children,
right.
and we're saying, okay, what are we trying to pass on as far as morals and ethics and blah blah blah, and how do we go about teaching that in both the practical but also aesthetically, and that started leading me to working with more and more K through 8, and then K through 5, and now even K through 3, which honestly is starting. No offense to the college and high school crowd, but it's really becoming my favorite. Really becoming my favorite group.
And what do you like about that young group?
Well, first off, there's the things you would expect, that everything's a mystery to them.
Yeah.
And so there's, there are all these little question marks and light bulbs. There's that. They've not yet become hipper and cooler than thou.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember when that happened.
They've not yet become that.
Right.
And it's also that you start to see humanity and what it could be if guided correctly. How much of that sometimes is taken from us as we, as Blake says, move from innocence into experience. How much of us do we shed that we have when we're that age? How that age itself, there is no lying.
There's so much imagination.
There's imagination, but if you're not hitting it, they let you know by tuning out. Well, it's also the imagination. You can take them anywhere, and they'll go there with you. But as a performer, you can't fool these people, and they're not going to give you the polite applause. You can, and it forces me to take whatever education I've garnered or pilfered through my life and take these huge ideas and have to break them down in such a way that it's easily communicated to someone who really needs to hear it, and to do it in a way that they can understand it. So who was it, Einstein, or what he said, make everything simple but no simpler. You should be able to explain these things to someone who's like 10 years old or less, that kind of thing. It doesn't always have to be rarefied in these great places and with these great things, but it's really, in the end, it's about how to give something practical. Whether it's all the spiritual stuff we speak about, the intellectual things we speak about, politics, whatever it is, in the end, it's got a boogie on the ground. It's got to make it in the world. Other than that, it's a beautiful concept, but it's not doing anything.
Right. What's the point?
Right. What's the point?
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, that's helpful. That's interesting. I was wondering, I'm sure it sounds like you do all different kinds of audiences. What when you're dealing with adults, what's the biggest challenge that you run into periodically or ever, if you do, when you're getting on stage with, like you're going to be here in Medfield? So what are the sort of challenges you?
Well, coming to a community like a church is there could be challenges. There are challenges sometimes, but then there are challenges that aren't there. So let's just pick any, let's say, group of adults, right? Is because of living in the world, we've developed certain categories we put anything in.
Right.
And many times, because we've developed those categories, it's difficult for us to perceive of anything or person outside of that, right? And not saying it's impossible. Of course, it's not impossible. But it's a difficult thing for us to do that, and I'm not always sure that we naturally can unless we're asked to do so. So because we tend to easily categorize, we also tend to do that very often because I guess for our ancestors it was something of a survival tactic that we needed. So trying to get past people's expectations of what they think they might experience.
Okay.
Is always a challenge, and I'm implicit, myself in that. To do so, in one of my classes, especially performance and writing for performance, I've examined myself and asked the questions of what is the audience that I'm most comfortable performing in front of, and what is the audience I am afraid to perform in front of.
Yeah.
And there are two audiences that fit that, and they break down along a certain demographic.
Huh.
And then I examined myself and says, well, this is what I've been taught to. I know what social forces, cultural forces have been acting on this group of people. What I don't know, and it's easy for me to assume that they still adhere to those, or they've given in to any of those social forces.
What are those groups?
The two groups: white, male, Christian, heterosexual, conservative, Republican from either the Midwest or the South.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you run into those groups very often?
Any combination thereof. I mean, except for being from the South.
Right.
That's my father-in-law.
Okay.
He's just from New England.
Right, he's from New England.
If I said maybe from South E, then that would be him, right? But he's from New England, and so that's the demographic. And it's like, so what is it that I would have to say to that demographic of people?
The eyes that are sort of perceiving things according to certain preconceptions.
Right. What do I do? So if I'm faced with that audience, is there something that I have that can get past the categorizing that they may have, or I know they've been taught, because we live in America.
We've all been taught.
We know what we've been taught. We don't know what anyone has. So how to get past that and to get past the veneer of what we've been taught to be and how we've been taught to see each other, and to reach through to that part of us that hums to humanity.
Yeah.
Right? How to do that? How to speak to that part? And many times, it's difficult. It's always going to be difficult.
Is it?
Yeah, but people can give you different degrees of difficulty. Maybe by and so I try to arrange a performance so that it deals with that.
Yeah.
The second demographic is young, urban, African American male.
Huh.
And people say, well, why would that? Well, it's because that's who I was, and I know what I have been taught to think. And what I have been taught to think about, let's say, someone like me, who no longer lives, in certain areas, and who I may be married to, who my friends are, where it is I might hang out, what it is I read, right? I know what I've been taught to think about that as being not a person who's of me anymore, who's inauthentic, who's an individual who I have nothing, I can relate to him, and to some degree traitorous.
Yeah.
Right, and to be able to to some degree, and to be able to reach through that.
Yeah.
Many times what I find is that the same techniques, art, the same kind of art that connects works with both.
Well, that's interesting.
Sometimes it's just a matter of language. Because that tends to be our ambassadors.
Yeah.
Our ambassador is language.
Appropriate language in the right place, and they go, "Oh, I understand what this guy's talking about."
Right. And so I think it's because of years of doing performance poetry and poetry slam, which is a competition, for poets. That what it teaches you is to look at an audience and try to, give an audience what you think of yourself that you think communicates, given the situation you find yourself in. Maybe it's somewhat akin to Apostles Paul and to trying to be all things to all people, or maybe the sort of Cupid or Vitra, who would have an arrow in the quiver and figure out which arrow is necessary, to pierce the heart of someone.
We're complex people, so we have.
Yes.
I mean, you're an artist. You have many different parts
Sides,
of you,
right? And
you can push this part out or show this part
Absolutely.
more. That's how it connects with the audience.
Absolutely, and I see it that way.
Yeah.
I see it that way. In my classes, when I'm teaching performance, again, I always speak to us all being a community within ourselves, and what we're trying to do as writers, if it's a writing community, is to develop each one of those members of the community to have a voice which is unique in and of itself, or for his and herself, but also to its highest diction. To its highest articulate voice within
that community of voices.
That particular community of voices. Exactly. And I think that that's important, and for us to always understand that if I can see myself and understand myself as complex, right? Then I have to be able to give that to someone else.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
which means that I cannot easily categorize anyone. And what poetry has taught me is that everything you see is only a projection. There's something else going on that you cannot understand. There's another depth there. Metaphor shows us, you know, metaphor shows us that this is the surface, but but as Chomsky would say, there's a deep structure.
Yeah.
There's
And
a deep
maybe
structure.
Many different
Rivulets that
many
run,
different- right.
yeah, that run and like
Right.
branching out,
Right.
and yeah, you know, give everyone what you would need of yourself,
Yeah.
which is to understand that you're more than just one thing. We don't feel just one thing at one time.
Right.
We don't think really just one thought at one time. It's always, you know, bringing together more than one thing. And as human beings, that's who we are. So yeah, extend that to other people
Yeah.
as well, and that helps me when I get into, you know,
Situations like
yeah, when I might be tempted to write someone off because
Right.
of what I heard about them.
category or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And it's a relentless trying to beat back your worst self. You know,
Yeah.
who can be pretty insistent.
Right.
You know, no, that guy, he knows how to, you know, how to make
The
me.
judgmental
Oh
part,
yeah, yeah,
right.
he's always around.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. I'm excited. Like I said, I'm really excited about about seeing your performance and the people that come with you too, listening to what they have to do, and you all working together.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I just want to, you know, I feel like the time that I saw you, there were a number of kids in the audience.
Uh-huh.
So I'm trying to figure out. It sounds like we could really, if we can get youth there, it'll be really nice.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love to bring young people.
Yeah.
You know, younger people. Well, you know, the older I get, the younger they get. Right. I love to bring younger people out. You know. So that, you know, any of them who might have a preconceived notion about what poetry is or can be.
Right.
I would like to bring them out. And,
Right.
and you know, it'll be a fairly family-friendly crowd.
Yeah.
Well, not crowd, but selection of what we have.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it would be good to see community.
Yeah.
Again, complexity,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah.
community is made up of more than just adults.
Yep.
You know,
Definitely.
and so I'd like to see the teens and the tweens, and
Yeah.
if we can get younger people out there, that would be great.
Yeah, that'll be nice. Well, I just want to tell our viewers that Reggie has a wonderful poem that you did for the TEDx Boston. And
yeah.
If you want to get a little taste of Reggie's wonderful performance and poetry, you might go to the TEDx Boston, Google TEDx Boston and YouTube and Regie Gibson, Gibson, and you will find Reggie's TEDx Boston talk, and it's wonderful. And you'll get a sense for what
Thank you.
being with you live in a performance situation is going to be like. So
Thank you.
So, Reggie, I really enjoyed talking with you.
You as well. You as well. I haven't seen you in a while, and it's good to see you here.
It's good to see you, and I hope a lot of you, many viewers, if you can come and be with us at the performance, it'll be terrific.
Yeah, thank you.
Reggie,
Thank you. Thank you.
The preceding was a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.